Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, it's part 11 of the new excavator build. On last week's show, we were working on the ram cylinders, and that will continue on this week's show. So we're going to start it all off with a little bit of 3/16 diameter dowel. Well, I have finally finished up the outer shells of these ram cylinders, and we now have cut our 3/16 dowel. These will be the inner pistons of these things, and we have cut them so that they are 1/8 of an inch longer than what the plans say. Now, the reason for that is if we look at the plans, we can see here that we have a base ring, and that seems to mount to the end of one of our 3/16 dowels. But it's just a butt joint, which I think is extremely insecure. It has zero strength. So what I've done is I have taken the base rings and I have drilled a 1/8 inch deep, 3/16 of an inch in diameter hole in the end of each one of these so that we can get some wood glue in there and glue this onto the end of our piston rod here, and that will make this a heck of a lot more secure. Well, I found a little bit of a discrepancy that is going to cause a slight bit of a problem. For me, it's a little bit too late, and if you have been following along week by week and making your own, it's too late for you as well. But if you are following along after watching all of the shows first, you'll be able to correct it right from the get-go. And the discrepancy that I found is in the boom arm base side. And if we look here on the plans, we can see that it calls for a 5/32 diameter hole. And yet, if we look at its mating piece, the boom arm base on sheet 5, it calls for a 1/8 inch hole. Now, the excavator assembly drawing on sheet 9 shows that the cylinders are held in by a boom cylinder link pin that in this case is 5/32 in diameter with a 5/16 diameter head. Now, here's the problem. How do you get a 5/32 diameter boom cylinder link pin through a 1/8 diameter hole? Well, you don't. So if you are following this after watching the videos, make sure that you drill all your holes either at 1/8 or at 5/32. So what I've done to compensate that is I've made my pins 1/8 of an inch in diameter, and then when they get inserted here to hold our cylinders, they will basically just be glued in at the far side in our 1/8 inch hole, and they'll be free floating in the 5/32 diameter hole. There's really not much I can do about that right now. I can't change it. No sense in crying over spilt milk. We're able to correct it in this case, but just be aware of that discrepancy. So we can start putting this together. It's really not rocket science. I've made a bunch of retaining pins according to the prints. I really don't like the retaining disc that they have on sheet 7, where you make 2 of these things. They're 1/16 of an inch thick, and they're supposed to hold the boom and all its moving parts. So I've made mine a little beefier. That's just what I like to do, and we can now essentially follow the exploded view of the boom arm subassembly and put the arm itself of the boom together on your model. So the next piece we're going to make will be this dipper arm base. And just like we did with the headlight housings, I've taken a piece of stock dimensioned off the plans, and I have cut a dado in it right down through the middle. The same process like what we did for these headlight housings. From there, we're just going to take the pattern. We're going to photocopy it using spray adhesive. We'll attach it to the blank that we have here. We'll drill our hole and then cut it at the scroll saw. From there, we can just do a dry fit onto our arm, and if everything is hunky-dory, then we can glue it into place. And once you're happy with that and the glue is dry, you can place the ram that we made earlier right in place here, and it will be held in place with a 1/8 inch diameter dowel, just like that. Now, I really don't want to glue this in place just yet, just in case I have to make adjustments. So I'm going to leave this as a dry fit, and I'll come back to it later and glue it in place. So the next piece I want to move on to will be the stick arm body. Guys, I've already shown you most of the techniques there is to making this, so there's nothing to show you here. Attach your pattern to a 3/4 inch thick piece of stock, just like it says on the plans, 3/4 of an inch thick. Cut it out and drill your holes, and that piece is finished once you give it a sanding. Once we get that done, we'll give it a dry fit on the model. Well, we now need to make a few more of these ram bases, 1 bucket ram base and 2 of these other ones. They are the same process of cutting the channel in the stock first, then you do the drilling, and then you do the cutting. What I would suggest to strengthen this, because it is a fragile piece and you can snap them, is the gap here is 1/4 of an inch. So I would place a 1/4 of an inch piece of scrap stock in this dado in order to support it while cutting. And then when you're done, you can just pop that out and you get your piece. A lot less chance of breaking it when you have a piece supporting it, so it doesn't snap along the grain here. And once you get those bases glued in place and you're happy with them, you can do a dry fit here of the main piston and the 2 booms together. And yeah, it seems to work just fine. I dig it. Right on. Okay, so now we have a couple more of these pistons. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering where to get the dimensions for where to mount those brackets, you can actually look over at sheet 10, and there is a scale drawing there that shows you exactly where they go, and you can either scale off the drawing or just align your pieces with the drawing and glue them in place. It's easy peasy. So here we go. We have this now. We have a couple more pistons to do. And I don't think that we need a video of it, only because I went through it when we made these 3 here. It's the exact same process. And in fact, you actually made a couple of the pieces for it back then when we made these ones. So get those other pistons made according to the dimensions on the drawing, and I'll see you when you get that done. And once you get your 2 hydraulic cylinders made, you can dry fit them in place, and those will be done. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to turn my attention to the bucket. Now there are certain pieces in the bucket that require multiples of them to be made. So those are going to be stack cut. And we can set up our stock. I'll just take a break from this here. I have the stock thickness here, and I have 2 pieces taped together so that I can stack cut them. Pieces like this will just get cut and the holes drilled all one shot, and those will be done. Same with pieces like this, which is the thumb, and you need 2 of these. But for the bucket sides, this is what we're going to do. We're still going to cut 2 of them at the exact same time. However, we are going to cut about a 1/16 of an inch or a little more around the outside perimeter of a bucket. And I'll explain that afterwards. You'll understand. So let's get these pieces cut. Any pieces that we can take the pattern off of the print and cut them for this bucket, we will do that. The only thing that we will not cut at this point, or will not even attempt to cut, will be the inner lining of the bucket. And again, I will explain that in just a second. So get all your pieces cut and then come back and see me. We're going to start the bucket build with constructing the thumb. So I have cut the pieces, the thumb connecting bar, the 2 thumbs, the thumb connector plate, all of those on sheet 8. You will also need 1 pin 1C and 1 pin 1B. And the last piece that we're going to need for the thumb assembly will be the pin 1C support. That is over on sheet 9. And when you get them all cut, you have the pieces that look like this. Guys, this is nothing more than following the patterns and cutting the pieces. That's why there isn't much more of a video of how to make these pieces. It's simple pattern following. So the first thing we want to do is I want to glue on one of the 1/8 by 1/8 support blocks. And you can get the positioning off of the full-size diagram of the bucket on page 10. And the first thing we want to do is we just want to glue one of them on. It's important to get these squared up so that everything fits properly. So the next thing I've done is I've taken our pin supports and I have placed our 1/8 diameter pin through it. That's the 1C pin. And we can glue them in place. This dowel is just to get the alignment right, because we need them to line up, because we will have a dowel that will go through them later on that will connect both our piston and our thumb sections. So we will line this up just like this, and just like everything else, we'll clean up our squeeze out and let this dry. And while we're waiting for that to dry, we can glue in our other support. And the last thing to do for the thumb is to install this dowel here, the pin, and use that to align our two thumbs. You can use the longer pin as well at these back holes, and we can glue these to the side of our center assembly. Now you just want to be careful. Go sparingly on the glue so that we don't accidentally glue this pin in, because we need to remove it afterwards. And that should provide you with something that looks like this. It's a pretty simple piece, as long as you kind of pay attention to what you're doing and think about the process. You don't just jump into it. So now, just to make sure that things are going well, we're going to dry fit it onto our assembly. So the thumb will go into this bottom hole of our secondary boom, and then our piston will come into here, in between those two support brackets, and then connect with the 1/8 inch pin. And there we go. That is now the thumb assembly attached, albeit temporarily, but no big deal. We can glue it in later once we have everything built. Now, here's kind of a funny little thing. Some of you already know that this entire build is a pictorial on the show's Facebook channel. And step by step, every single picture of everything I've made is there for the viewing. And I had an observant viewer of the YouTube channel contact me and say, "Kenny, it looks like you've got one of those tracks on backwards." And sure enough, I came out and checked, and I do, and I think it's absolutely hilarious. But this one here on the passenger side is actually backwards. The other side is correct, but this one is backwards. The links are completely opposite. So kudos to that viewer for paying attention and seeing that the tracks are are put in reverse. So here, just to make everything right and to make him and me happy, we're going to repair that and put the track on properly. So thank you for pointing that out. Hey, you know what? I make mistakes too, but honest to goodness, that is absolutely hilarious. All right, so there we go. Now we're fixed and we can move on with the build. Well, the next pieces that have been made are the bucket ram linkage bars and this larger linkage bar here, all of them on sheet 8. And we've cut a couple of pins here. These ones are the D pins, D as in dog. And again, these are simple pieces that are just following patterns and cutting either on the scroll saw or with hand tools. So we can now fit these in place again with a dry fit, just to make sure that everything is coming together properly. There we go, just like that. That looks great. I like the way that operates. Okay. So there we go. That is all done with a dry fit. And now what we need to do is I need to work on the main bucket for the excavator. Now the bucket walls of the main bucket are actually made up of 4 different pieces. Each one of them is 1/16 of an inch thick. 1/16 of an inch on a butt joint to form this bucket, in my mind, is not enough glue surface area to give a good connection. It makes it very fragile. So what I've got is I've got the original bucket side pattern, and I am going to reduce this pattern by 3/16 of an inch. And once I get that done, I'm going to take it over to the scroll saw and cut it out. And what you end up with is a marking template. I want to make the bucket interior walls all one piece, and I want to make it 3/16 of an inch thick to give it more gluing surface. So I have a blank that I've glued up, and this is 2 1/8 of an inch thick. This is the width of all of the pieces that are on the interior bucket. So we're just going to line up our marking template, and we will mark out our new profile. And we can take this over to the bandsaw now, and using a 3/16 blade, we can cut just to the inside of our marks. And now using the oscillating drum sander, we will sand up to the line to finish off the interior surface of the bucket. And once you're done that, you can move on to the next step. Now, truth be told, this flat area in here, this is hand filing and hand sanding. I cut it pretty much to the line at the bandsaw and then got in there with a file and a chisel and cleaned it up in that corner, and that's all there is to it. So now I've placed a line across the cut opening here of our blank, and what we're going to do, this will center our side pieces onto our blank. We are going to put them there in line and glue them onto the entire section here on both sides to make a complete, I guess, box, we'll call it, and let that completely set up. And once it's all dried up, we are going to take this over to the bandsaw. You may have noticed that I left my pattern intact on the one side. Well, we are going to cut just outside that line on the bandsaw and then take it over to the belt sander, and we'll finish it off and clean up the exterior of it. And when the sanding is done, you end up with a bucket that looks like this. And because of the way it was cut, you can't tell by looking at it that it is actually 3/16 of an inch of glue surface area as opposed to the 1/16. It looks exactly like it should. The walls are still right, but it's a much more secure piece as well. It's much easier to make. I mean, trying to get the ends to butt join properly and match all up, that's an insane undertaking. So sometimes it's okay to rethink what you're doing in a model and do it the way that you think it should be done. And that's what I've done here. I'm pleased with the results. So it's time to move on now. And we have these 2 brackets, and that would be our 2 pivot brackets and our 2 pivot bracket bases, base number 1 and base number 2. Now these will get glued onto our bucket. We'll just follow the plans for this and get them glued into place and let them set up. It's not a bad idea with these 1/8 inch holes to get a couple of 1/8 inch dowels in there to allow for alignment. So the next piece that we want to install will be the bucket side trim. And they show all kinds of angles for you to cut here, and you know, sometimes you can overcomplicate this. So all I've done is I've cut some pieces of stock, and we are going to glue these onto the side of our bucket just like this with a little bit of overhang on each end. And then once they're dry, we can trim them to be exactly fitting for our bucket. So no need to try to cut those ahead of time, guys. You'll drive yourself insane trying to do that. And you can see the kind of results you get with that without having to mess around with all those crazy cutting angles and stuff on such a small, thin, tiny piece. So I have now cut the pieces that I need for our bucket outer trim pieces. And I will be gluing these in place. There is 6 all in all. One that goes across the bottom front, and then 5 across this section. So I'm going to get all of those glued into place, let them set up, and then we'll give that a sanding to finish off the trim of the lower end of the bucket. After that, really all we need to do now is do a dry fit of the bucket to make sure that everything is fitting the way that we want it to fit. And it can be a little finicky, but eventually it works out just fine. So I like the action. The action looks good. Everything seems to be working the way that it should. I guess we can carry on now. And I think the next thing we're going to build for this will be the teeth for our bucket. So these teeth can be a little tricky, but don't worry about it. We'll get through it. What I've got here is a piece of 1/4 inch thick material, and I have cut it, I think it's about 4 by 4 square, roughly. It's just to give us some extra room to work. It's way more than what we need. And what I've done is I've scaled off the drawing, and I have placed marks on here along with the taper to make the front angles of the teeth. Now the print says it's a 32-degree angle. I've measured this off, and from center it's 16 degrees off of the horizontal plane here. And so we can mark that, and we're going to take that over to the belt sander, and we will very carefully sand that and get it up to the lines that we have marked there. And then some hand sanding will round off this top edge of the tooth. And at this point I have set my blade height on my table saw to 1/8 of an inch, and I have set my stop on my miter fence so that the blade will cut at 1/2 an inch in from the end point here. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut a dado that will represent this little notch here on the teeth. So we can cut this, I'm going to say cut it about 1/2 an inch to 3/4 of an inch wide. And at this point now we can cut them into 1/4 inch wide strips. And if we look here at the plans, we can see a 1/32 of an inch kerf. I don't have that bit, so I'm going to use a 1/16 inch bit at the router table with my miter sled. I'll raise the bit to 1/32 of an inch, and I will route in all of these little dados for the detail on the teeth. And now we can give these pieces a sanding, and after that we can use our miter box. We'll cut them to length, and this final chamfer right here, we can just hand sand this on our teeth and then glue them in place onto our bucket. And there we have our finished bucket with the teeth installed. We now need to basically glue all this stuff together. And in the plans, it shows these kind of retaining rings. And I have to say, once again, I don't really like that. So what I do is I make little buttons with a little tiny 1/8 hole in it, and that ends up capping the ends of our pieces. It is a much more stable connection here between these pieces. It gives you more glue surface to have this hold together. These are moving parts, and I would really hate to have these moving parts suddenly fall apart because that little tiny retaining ring just doesn't hold on. So let's get our bucket glued in place. We'll glue in all of our pins for our pistons all the way around. We'll make sure all those are finished up. And there's just a few more little pieces to do on this model. And honestly, I don't think we need a video of them. Well, the few pieces that we have left are these boom arm lights over on sheet 7, and as well we have our step blocks to make over on sheet 3. Now, back in part 4 of this series, I showed you how to make these step blocks. And it's just a matter of careful routing with start and stop blocks at the router table. It's really no big deal. As for the boom lights, there's squares with chamfers on them. Cut your squares to the size that you need and then sand them by hand to get them chamfered the way that you want until you like the way they look. Truth be told, I'm going to be leaving my step blocks out. I really don't think it's going to contribute to the model, and I'll tell you why. If we look on sheet 9 at the assembly drawing, we can see here that there is actually a secondary rail, a handrail that goes over onto the passenger side of the cab. As well, we can see that rail here on sheet 10, and yet nowhere in the plans is there any pattern or any shaping, any mention of this railing. So I think those steps would look a little odd without the railing, and honestly, at some point in time after you've put in so many hours in a model, you just know when you're done. And honestly, guys, I am done. I have been waiting 11 episodes to say this. And there you have it. Toys and Joys, the new excavator, pattern number 130. Guys, what a build, honestly. This is crazy. I have had other build series on this channel that have been more than 11 parts, so this actually isn't too bad. And I kind of compressed the last part a little bit, skipped over a few things, only because it was starting to become repetitive and redundant and redundant and repetitive. Guys, there is nothing really out of reach in this model where you couldn't do this. Just because you don't have the tools to perform the methods that I show you here on the show, that doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that you can't do it the way that I did. And for every single process, I've told you this before, there's at least 10 different ways to do it. It's all a matter of rocking what you got and thinking outside of the box. Now, frequently asked question, the most frequently asked question, how long did this model take? This model took 130 hours. That's what it took. Just time well spent. Models are very time consuming, but you're never in a rush. So really, when you think about it, we took 130 hours of work and we crunched it down into an 11-part series, at most maybe 5.5, 6 hours at the most. That's not bad considering. And I really hope that it has helped you guys. For those of you out there who want to try this model, I hope that this series has been a help to you, because honestly, this is more fun than I should legally be allowed to have, guys. These models are fantastic. And even with the few discrepancies that are in the plans, the missing handrail, the mislabeled holes that hold the main boom, that sort of thing, it's still a wonderful project and you can still have a great time with it. You guys, however, have the benefit of knowing ahead of time. If you watch the series, you know ahead of time what to look for in those discrepancies, and you can correct them before you get to the point of no return like what I did. Now, here's the thing. If you guys want to try this model for yourself, I encourage it wholeheartedly. I really, really do. You never know what you can do until you give it a try. So the link for the pattern is down below in the description. Check it out. I think it's like 20 bucks. And if you're interested in that pattern, if you're interested, this tutorial will help you to get through, get it built. And if you have something there that you're not sure what to do, you're not sure how to make it, drop me an email, send me a message. I would be more than happy to help you if I can, and we'll work through it together. Guys, you've got your own woodworking tutor right here, and all you got to do is reach out. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this 11-week series or 11-part series. This has been just a blast. It's a lot of fun, a lot of hours, a lot of work, but honestly, it's well worth it, and I hope you're going to give it a try. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this series. I hope you've enjoyed the content. Honestly, guys, I hope you're going to try this for yourself. Give it a whirl. What do you got to lose? And more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video. Thanks for tuning into the series, guys. This has been a blast.